of savage guerrilla war ended.
I wish to assure you that the support we have, we will not put to ill use. We will use in order to further the objectives of the Lancaster House Agreement, so that we proceed to elections and our people can vote ZANU into power.
Under the leadership of Robert Mugabe, the people of Zimbabwe were free at last. It was a time of peace and great hope. Mugabe united a warring nation.
Yesterday I fought you as an enemy. Today you have become a friend and ally, with the same national interest, loyalty, rights and duties as myself. If yesterday you hated me, today you cannot avoid the love that binds you to me and me to you. Is it not folly, therefore, that in these circumstances, anybody should seek to revive the wounds and grievances of the past?
I believe that Mugabe at one point was a genuine leader of the people, especially when Mugabe led the liberation struggle up to 1980. That required some commitment to purpose, some commitment to certain principles.
His mother would have instilled in him the importance and the value of being a Catholic. Even by African standards, they were very, very poor family, extremely, very, very poor. He was a bit of a loner. You couldn't form any ordinary friendship with Mugabe.
This man, is so hateful of his father. He has never forgiven his father for drifting away from his mother, leaving them to be looked after by the missionaries there.
In that school, of course, he would have come very strongly under the influence of these remarkable Jesuit priests. The Jesuit education was sort of the foundation of his character, in the sense that he didn't tolerate injustice of any kind. And his critical attitude to the whites was formed there because, with his kind of brain, the system established by the colonial system was a negation of the rights of the African people.
Armed with a degree in economics, the young Robert took a teaching job in Ghana in 1957. And when Ghana gained its independence from Britain the following year, it made a huge impression on him.
Oh, there's no doubt at all that he went to Ghana at the right time, and he would have come immediately under the influence of Dr. Nkrumah.
Yesterday, this Parliament was subject to the Parliament of Britain. Today, its members owe loyalty only to the people of Ghana. Thus ends, with dignity and honor, 100 years of colonial occupation and colonial rule.
Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever.
And in 1961, Robert Mugabe married Ghanaian Sally Hayfron. Intelligent and politically astute, she was to prove a great support to him. Back in southern Rhodesia, the fever of the African nationalist movement was taking hold. Trade unionist Joshua Nkomo had formed a political party known as ZAPU, the Zimbabwe African People's Union. Thousands flocked to his banner, demanding the vote. The young Mugabe joined ZAPU and became Nkomo's loyal lieutenant. Britain supported majority rule.
They're singing the nationalist anthem to Zimbabwe, the African name for Rhodesia.
I'm not prepared to sacrifice everything I've worked for, just because Britain wants us to have a black majority rule before time. But the black majority rule will come, and so it should. But they must be ready for it, I feel.
We want our own independence based on one man, one vote. That Africans are behind their own independence.
Mugabe was a fiery young man. He was highly political minded, well-spoken, and he had learned a lot from Ghana.
Would you be ready to take power immediately?
Yes, we are ready. Just now, we are ready to take power, and we feel we'll establish a government which is better than the present government. The Europeans in the country must regard themselves as citizens of the country, and they count only for one. Each of them counts for one. They should not expect special seats reserved for them in our community.
The leader of ZAPU, Joshua Nkomo, came from the Ndebele-speaking west of the country. Mashonaland lies to the east. A mainly Shona-speaking faction split from ZAPU to form ZANU, the Zimbabwe African National Union.
We wanted Mugabe with us in ZANU, away from the rest of the group. So we kept agitating, we of the lower ranks. No, to these more senior ones. No, please get Mugabe to come along to form the new party with us. This is my happiest day. This man here, who was stuck with Nkomo for all these years, right, has finally seen the light and has joined us. It's my happiest day.
ZANU and ZAPU were bitter rivals. This was to black politics for decades, but both backed majority rule. Right-wing whites were dead set against it. In 1964, they backed hardline conservative farmer Ian Smith as Prime Minister. In the ensuing government crackdown, Smith jailed Mugabe and many of the nationalist leaders without trial. Mugabe was to spend 11 long years in detention.
We set up a school there at Skombela. Among us were people educated enough to be teachers, so we were teaching village children at that school, and the headmaster of that school was Robert Mugabe. Right.
When his only son, with Sally, died, he was not allowed to bury that child. That again must have had a tremendous effect on his psyche.
Black political aspirations were modest. They wanted simple political rights.
As conflict escalated, Britain pushed harder for black majority rule. But right-wing Rhodesians absolutely refused to share their power and wealth with black Africans. Many nearby countries were now majority ruled. Harold Wilson tried to broker an agreement, but Smith tore his country away from British rule in a unilateral Declaration of Independence, or UDI.
We, the government of Rhodesia, do, by this proclamation, adopt, enact, and give to the people of Rhodesia the Constitution annexed hereto. God save the Queen.
Smith was the leader of a colonial government, of a white minority supremacist government. There was no democracy in that only whites and a limited number of blacks were allowed to vote.
Not in 1,000 years. I repeat, I believe in black and whites working together. If one day it's white and the next day it is black, I believe we will have failed, and I think it will be a disaster for Rhodesia.
The Prime Minister's broadcast will be repeated at the following time.
The use of an ideology, in the case of Smith, it was like Western Christian ideology against communism. The use of a threat. Smith used communism, Mugabe uses Western imperialism to justify whatever actions they take.
Backed by the Soviet Union, Joshua Nkomo's ZAPU assembled guerrilla forces in neighboring Zambia. ZANU forces based in Mozambique were trained by the Chinese.
White Rhodesians are told that we are fighting communism because the black parties are armed and equipped by communist countries and have communist equipment. This is true, they have. But what white Rhodesians don't see is that we ourselves don't produce a single round of ammunition, and that we are armed and equipped entirely by a foreign power as well.
The foreign power was South Africa, hoping to stop black majority rule. But as the war heightened, they feared it would spread to them. Trying to nip communist revolution in the bud, they made Smith release nationalist leaders for negotiations. Mugabe was not interested in negotiation. With Tekere, he fled to join ZANU in Mozambique. After a tough struggle, Mugabe rose to become party chairman. ZANU's ideology was revolutionary and socialist. But traveling the world to raise support, Mugabe changed his rhetoric.
We are fighting for democracy. We would like to see a democratic state established in Zimbabwe. And this means a state based on the wishes of the majority of the people. The best way in which people can demonstrate their participation in democracy is by voting, and elections are quite a necessity.
We articulated our struggle as a struggle for freedom, democracy, social justice, peace, and human dignity.
The struggle became full-scale war. Where Rhodesians had technology, guerrillas infiltrated peasant villages and fought back. While Rhodesians ruled the skies, ZANU and ZAPU controlled more and more ground. Rhodesians bombed their base camps. The casualties were horrendous. But the body count was mounting for the white minority too. The death toll became too high. They were finally ready to talk.
Aim is to bring Rhodesia to legal independence on a basis which the Commonwealth and the international community as a whole will find acceptable.
At the Commonwealth Conference in Zambia, President Kaunda waltzed Thatcher into an agreement.
The British government is wholly committed to genuine black majority rule in Rhodesia.
Negotiations opened at Lancaster House. Mugabe and Nkomo temporarily presented a united front. But when Britain insisted the constitution protect private land rights, Mugabe walked out. Only when Samora Machel threatened to close his bases did he return. A constitution was agreed. Britain would look for funds to buy white land for black farmers. This would later cause conflict, but for now, the three warring armies signed a ceasefire.
The war is now finished.
Peace was fragile.
The forces we have fought against have not been vanquished. Naturally creates anxieties and fears on the part not only of the generality of the people here, but also on the part of our own fighters.
The war being over, it is essential that you and those against whom you fought should now come and work together.
We fought each other. That is history. Let us together make it the best one in the world. I don't mind what it's called, because it's such a damn good place. So I say to you, Bambere, Zimbabwe.
In the first democratic election in the history of Zimbabwe, Mugabe insisted ZANU campaign separately from ZAPU. But one thing was sure: one man, one vote meant the end of white rule.
The total electorate flocked to the polls. There were reports of people walking over 8 miles to vote.
Each of the three main parties was utterly determined to win.
1.3%. ZANU PF polled 1,668,900.
Ladies and gentlemen, for my party, for the Patriotic Front as a whole, this is a great moment. It's a moment of our victory, the culmination of our national struggle.
In 1980, the British colony of Rhodesia became the independent state of Zimbabwe, and the man who took over the reins of power was Robert Mugabe.
Do swear that I will well and truly serve Zimbabwe in the office of Minister of the Government. So help me God.
Samora Machel said to Robert Mugabe, you have the jewel of Africa in your hands. Don't smash it.
President Robert Mugabe was my hero. My mother belonged to ZAPU, and I was not so much into ZAPU. And I used to argue with my mother as to why she's supporting Joshua Nkomo and why we should be supporting Joshua Nkomo, because I was so impressed by Robert Mugabe, articulate, educated man, a man that made me to be proud to be Zimbabwean.
I received a telegram from him as Prime Minister. And the telegram spoke in very glowing terms about the future he saw for all Zimbabweans. He spoke of democracy and peace. And ironically, he concluded quoting Roosevelt. He said, in returning to Zimbabwe, you have nothing to fear but fear itself. And I just thought that this was a great man.
It's a difficult exercise, extremely difficult when you are building socialism against a background, formidable background of capitalism. You have to try and transform the Ian Smiths into being socialists. And he tells me he's a socialist already.
We just had the end of the war. In traditional African beliefs, they say that the rain comes to wash away the footsteps, to wash away the blood, to wash away the skeletons. All the bad things of the war were cleaned out.
Mugabe healed the wounds of war with a government of national unity. Joshua Nkomo was Minister of Home Affairs, and a white farmer, Dennis Norman, became Minister of Agriculture.
Well, let me describe the first cabinet meeting. I think everyone was a little apprehensive. It was new. Nobody had ever served in a cabinet in their lives. When it came to the end, we sort of got up to leave. Then Mugabe said, "Oh, there's just one point I'd like to make." Because although it was a cabinet meeting, there was a variety of dress, from Hawaiian shirts to Mansitung tunics to, well, nobody quite in shorts, but it was a mixture of clothing, apparel. And Mugabe said, "I'd just like to say that if you wish to remain cabinet ministers, I expect you to dress as cabinet ministers." I never saw anybody in any meeting other than in a suit from that day onwards.
You know, we can never have peace in the country unless the peasant population is satisfied in regard to land. At the moment, there is that grievance. It's not deep-seated yet because there is hope that government is going to get more land. And I do hope that those of you with land to spare can allocate it to the state. We are not seizing it. We are buying it from you, and we would want you to be understanding on that subject.
And here is an example of a farm, some 5,000 acres in extent, of which 4,000 acres are under crops of different types. The owner of the
Since the British arrived in 1888, a handful of settlers had occupied over half the arable land. They took over the country and ruled over the peasant farmers, many of whom they drafted in as cheap labor.
Sometimes they have to be taught the most rudimentary mechanical movements. But they progress rapidly to more complicated industrial tasks.
Independence brought great changes. Zimbabwe focused on developing peasant farming and on land redistribution, with funds from the Lancaster House Agreement. 3 million hectares bought from white farmers were given to blacks in one of Africa's most successful resettlement schemes.
We became the bread basket of the region, precisely because of the policies of President Robert Mugabe. I don't know whether Zimbabweans remember the so-called agricultural extension officers or agritechs, the people that went into the rural areas to help poor rural small producers to produce things like maize, things like cotton, groundnuts, and that kind of stuff. I mean, it was all there in 1980, 1981, 1982.
At independence, the communal farmers or the rural farmers marketed not more than 25% of commercial produce. By the end of 1986, 65% of all commercially marketed maize was coming from the communal areas. 70% of all commercially marketed cotton was coming from the communal areas. And about 30-35% of marketed beef was coming from the communal areas. Prime Minister Mugabe, presumably as an educationist himself, had this profound belief in education. He would always say, all our people must gain an education. So government committed itself to supporting a free education policy, a free health policy.
I am what I am today because of the education policies of President Robert Mugabe and many more, the people that you're talking about when we started this interview, who are now abroad, educated in Zimbabwe, the health facilities in Zimbabwe, doctors and nurses, the police force and that kind of stuff.
Already, remarkable things were happening. He was addressing, he and his government, of course, were addressing the people in the periphery, who had never been attended to before, who didn't have schools and clinics and so on, that's where he went, to the periphery. Right on the Mozambique border, he put up a clinic. School. The place was growing already in 1982. It's only a year and a half after independence.
The peace was rudely shattered when South Africa blew up Zimbabwe's fuel supplies. Terrified that black majority rule would spread to her, South Africa began destabilizing all her neighbors.
In political terms, the South African strategy has been to portray the image of this region as one of instability and chronic turmoil within our member states. In the economic field, we have paid heavily and we have paid highly from destabilization.
Zimbabwe's export links to Mozambique were destroyed by a South African-funded rebel army. Mugabe sent in troops. The high cost of defense drained the economy, but that didn't stop the program of development. Mugabe's determined defiance of South Africa and apartheid paid off. He was elected chairman of the International Non-Aligned Movement, a position of enormous prestige amongst developing nations.
What is needed now is action. I earnestly urge members of this movement should agree to adopt and implement, for a start, the voluntary selective sanctions against South Africa outlined in the declarations adopted in Paris and Vienna.
Mugabe was also feted by the West, drank tea with the Queen of England, and was eventually knighted.
He was this Marxist terrorist who actually transmogrified into a very English kind of leader, very respectable and quite conservative.
Robert Mugabe is what we call a Western-oriented gentleman. The man is immaculate in his dressing. He is virtually British in his table manners and, decor, etiquette, the lot. But this is the same man who hates Britain with a passion. This is the same man also who loves music by Cliff Richard. He is, in fact, the character of, self-contradictions.
He's the most charming of men on a one-to-one basis. Absolutely charming, very personal, very friendly, and that kind of stuff. To the extent that after my meetings with people, I've always said, I believe that somebody's keeping the president completely out of touch with what is happening, because I don't believe that the man that I've just met, the man who's so warm, so charming, can do the kind of things that people say he's done.
Everyone was very happy about the 1980 situation, quite excited. I think the hopes were very high. And I think President Mugabe, then Prime Minister, was very highly regarded. I think he was respected by everyone. And all our hopes were in his leadership to get the country to a better country.
In the 1980s, it was very easy to see in all other parts of the country other than Matabeleland that wonderful things were taking place.
Matabeleland was the heartland of ZAPU and Joshua and Nkomo. When arms caches were unearthed on a ZAPU property, the old rivalry was reignited. Mugabe pointed his finger at the Minister of Home Affairs.
The dissidents bear all the time as they operate. They are very frank, very bold. They are operating in the name of father of Zimbabwe, Dr. Joshua Nkomo. He then is the father of dissidents, and so what am I to say?
Mugabe dismissed Nkomo from government.
I've never done anything wrong, and Robert knows it. I told you this is for personal power. Let him stand up and deny it.
Mugabe then mobilized his strongest force. The 5th Brigade was a lethal, Korean-trained special unit answerable directly to him.
I would like to pay tribute to our comrades in arms, the instructors from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
On the 26th or so of January the following year, the 5th Brigade went into Matabeleland, and the first onslaught was indescribably violent.
The Matabeleland and Kukuraundi massacres were really aimed at the population in general to crush ZAPU. That was the first sign that things were going wrong.
ngoba umuntu engafunakali ngophuma zezindebeni kwesinye isikhathi ngiyananzelela kwelinye ilanga abantu bevuthene kwethini lapho bathola umuntu engwesitshoneni wachaka kabuhlungu etshala ukuthi wayitholakala eMandebeleni bathe umuntu ongumama.
A number of people were pushed into a hut, and the hut was set on fire, and the people inside it were burnt. There was one survivor.
I question the integrity of a president of a country who stands up in full view of everybody and condones violence, not perhaps euphemistically or in a roundabout manner, but directly threatens those that oppose him with death. And a few days down the line, people get killed.
Unless there are real incidents brought to my notice, I cannot agree that they are carrying out any excesses at all. The dissident activity will eliminate, I can assure you. We have treated them with kid gloves all along, but we are going all out now to crush them, and we'll crush them.
ukuthi waruza ngo abantu ababekade behlatsheliswa lapho kwakufanele bahlabele kakhulu beqakeza.
One of the songs it went we Mugabe wakanaka shumba inyika, something of that nature. So we were made to sing those songs repeatedly, dancing. People were being beaten. Those who did not know Shona, sometimes they were made to file up at that end, one by one. Either they will be pushed over into the mine shaft, or they will be shot using pistols.
They told all kinds of stories regarding alleged atrocities perpetrated by the 5th Brigade, but they failed to prove them, you see. True, there may have been one or two incidents, but wherever you have operations, you're bound to have one or two untoward incidents, but not the mass graves which they talked about. Where are they? You travel the whole length and breadth of Matabeleland, and you won't find a single mass grave.
So the man's hands are tied behind his back?
Yes.
Tied with wire?
These are two hands, you see.
It was absolutely vital, in my view, for the well-being of Matabeleland, for the well-being, therefore, of the country, that the truth was told. That was it, breaking the silence.
In March 1997, we released the Human Rights Report, Breaking the Silence.
And it is atrocious in what it reports.
Izinto ezibuya njengalo zabantu ekhaya ngoba bona ngoba babulala abantu kwamadona elayinini ngaso size eCholoche Center kuloku indlela ekudlula khona baza babophela ilembe eminyama bona ngoba ekuyindlela ebuhlungu kakhulu ekungasela umuntu ogejela ukuthi uyagepha ufike ekhaleni.
I think Mugabe has always been a master at propaganda. He has been a master at spin. And so that spin that this is the anti-apartheid, this is the struggle against apartheid, actually worked. And certainly the whole of Africa ignored Kukuraundi. The British ignored it.
Mugabe forced his rival, Joshua Nkomo, to unite with him. The new party was called ZANU Patriotic Front, or ZANU-PF.
The political tensions lessened. There were negotiations, which ultimately led to ZAPU being swallowed up by ZANU-PF in terms of the Unity Accord, which was signed on the 22nd of December 1987.
Our unity is so vital, is so important for the development of this country. There must be no deceit. We must not deceive each other. We must mean what we say. We must do what we say. We must do what we promise to do.
Having swallowed ZAPU, Mugabe changed the constitution. He became executive president and the head of the armed forces. Now he tasted real power. But new opposition appeared, accusing the cabinet of corruption. Popular singer Thomas Mapfumo denounced corruption in song, but his music was banned from being broadcast. The next challenge came from one of Mugabe's oldest comrades. Edgar Tekere decided to run against Mugabe and ZANU in the upcoming presidential elections.
When we came from the bush, we did not bring in our manifesto that vote us in so we can establish a one-party state.
People who have left the party can come back to it. The door is very wide open. But they must be prepared to conform.
To rob the Zimbabwean of his right to make his choice freely and to interfere with that is to ask for a tragic downfall.
Mugabe used television to fight back.
This is one way to die. Another is to vote Zoom. Don't commit suicide. Don't be foolish. Vote ZANU-PF and leave.
Mugabe won and I lost.
The economy was weakened by the high costs of development and fighting apartheid. Zimbabwe was desperate for investment.
The collapse of international socialism, that was a major disappointment for Robert Mugabe because he is openly stated that he is an avowed, socialist. And so when international socialism collapsed, there was only one route left, and that was capitalism. And so capitalism could only be followed then by appealing to the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, for support, for financial support.
Subsidies were literally removed from basic commodities, making things extremely expensive for each and every person. In fact, unemployment increased because then what ASAP required was that it had to, it demanded a lean, thin employment capacity, especially in the public sector. So there was a lot of retrenchments. So thereby increasing the unemployment rate in Zimbabwe.
Times were hard. A devastating drought in 1992 hit peasant farmers badly, and the yield from commercial crops was down too. In the same year, Sally Mugabe died.
His first wife, there's no doubt about, she was a very strong personality. She was more politically aware, and she exercised a very great influence on him. If he did or said something that she didn't agree with, I think she told him in uncertain terms, no, that was wrong.
At the age of 72, the president shocked the nation by marrying his secretary, Grace Marufu. The couple already had 2 children.
Among the loudest cheers of the day were for President Mandela. Sitting next to him at the reception was Graça Machel.
Nelson Mandela, bigger than life, amazing charisma. A man that President Robert Mugabe wished he was, but he wasn't.
Land redistribution, which had started in the early 80s, had stopped dead. Though Mugabe had amended the constitution to allow greater powers of land designation, it seemed to many as if the government had forgotten about the landless rural majority. White farmers still owned most of the best land, and Zimbabwe's highest revenues came from their large commercial tobacco farms. White farmers grew rich. In the cities, too, the lavish lifestyle of the emerging elite was a source of resentment to many. While a new class of capitalists feasted, landless peasants tried invading 1 or 2 commercial farms, but they were driven off by the police. Then, veterans from Zimbabwe's War of Liberation discovered that members of Mugabe's Politburo had been looting the War Veterans Compensation Fund. They were a poor but militant group who could control the rural areas where the majority of voters worked as peasant farmers. They had the ability to make or break Mugabe's power base.
The demands for compensations and for pensions. That's basically those were the demands. And for such welfare issues as education and health and so forth. Those were the demands basically. Of course, Mugabe actually was surprised. This was a big shock to him.
Fearing a loss of power, Mugabe gave in. He paid out millions of dollars which the economy was not generating.
The $2,000 a month pension to war veterans and $50,000 handout was completely unbudgeted, completely, and certainly no discussion in Parliament. So all of these things indicated to the world, certainly, and to those of us who were thinking about it and who were involved there, that he was on the wrong track, that he had lost his, if he ever had any, he had lost his principles. And now he was looking after himself.
Land must be redistributed equitably. But the British have been fighting us, fighting the head of state, Comrade Mugabe. They don't want to understand that the Zimbabweans are in Zimbabwe. What Comrade Mugabe is saying and what the people of Zimbabwe are saying is that land must go back to the people of Zimbabwe.
With war veterans pressing, Mugabe needed to revive land reform. He reminded the British government of its promises to find funds to pay for it.
The Blair government came in. The then Minister of Lands and Agriculture, Gumbrai Kangai, wrote and reminded them of the agreement that was signed at Lancaster House. And they were looking forward to, I suppose, another instalment so they could purchase more land.
Tony Blair refused, saying his government had no link to colonial interests and no responsibility to meet costs of land purchase. Blair finally did offer support, but with stringent conditions. Mugabe was incensed. He saw conditions as an imperialist interference in Zimbabwe's affairs. From that moment, Mugabe characterized Blair as public enemy number one, and himself as the African leader to stand up against imperialism. More than ever, his actions were now dictated by a total determination to stay in power. This pushed him to rely once again on military force, veterans from the War of Liberation.
Mugabe was the man of the moment until Mandela arrived. Sometimes I think some of the more obvious tragedies of Zimbabwe could have been out of a reckless attempt to reinvent himself.
When the Democratic Republic of Congo asked for military help to resist invasion, Mugabe had the opportunity to show his prowess. He led the way.
He quickly deployed the Zimbabwe military with huge costs, which costs Zimbabwe up until now has not yet recovered from.
But it kept the top-level military happy. Congo afforded rich pickings.
So it was an ego trip that cost the nation a huge amount of money.
The cost of the war decimated an already weak economy. Inflation spiraled, protesters took to the streets. Trade unions, students, religious and human rights groups formed the National Constitutional Assembly. A new constitution was essential to vote Mugabe out of power.
At the time, we wanted to create a really genuine process of reforming the constitution of the country with a view to providing a platform for activism of the next generation. Within a year, we had quite, massive meetings, massive protest actions demanding constitutional reform.
Police were deployed against civilian protesters in an orgy of violence.
They cannot control the prices in Zimbabwe here, so they are useless people. We don't want them.
A new political party was formed. Morgan Tsvangirai was elected leader. It was called the Movement for Democratic Change.
The people who went to the MDC came from that movement of the NCA and the trade unions. Tsvangirai, being the Secretary General of the ZCTU, the trade union, then represented more the trade union component.
This is a serious matter.
A referendum on a new constitution was the only way to unseat the president.
nokuthi 1980 batakazisa inye nje kuground muno tawela kuzozisa flag yeZANU-PF mground muno.
The government quickly reacted by wanting to hijack it by saying, okay, fine, we can reform the constitution, but it is not you people who do it, these activists in the NCA and others. We would set up our own commission, which we did in 1999. That commission was to go around and do hearings. It was designed to hijack the process.
My opinion is that the people are going to vote yes, by and large, and that they will support, therefore, the draft constitution as presented them. An executive president with a prime minister who also shares executive powers, but appointed by the president.
ZANU had canvassed for a yes to Mugabe's new constitution, while the opposition had mounted a vigorous campaign for a no.
Well, let me go and vote.
And then afterwards?
Yes, I'll talk to you afterwards.
Thank you.
This morning, the Registrar General brought me the final copy of the results. Of over 1 million Zimbabweans who participated in the process, the majority of them voted against the draft constitutional document. Government accepts the result and respects the will of the people as expressed through these results.
President Mugabe didn't have any new ideas to sell to the people. And he then jumped on the bandwagon of land to the people as a mantra coming from the war veterans.
This threat of loss of power then became the fast-track land reform program.
A few weeks after losing the referendum, Mugabe launched the farm invasions.
So we are taking back the land. So nicely, no problem, peacefully.
It's not the land that was the problem. It's the fact that the white commercial farmers, together with their workers, close to over 500,000 of them, were seen as the backbone of MDC support. They had to be punished for writing checks to MDC. Their workers had to be punished for voting against the referendum, constitutional referendum that President Mugabe wanted.
With AKs, and when we were trying to leave, they fired shots. They fired 5 shots, and this guy got hit here in the leg.
When the war veterans once again took the lead, and when Joshua farms occupied them, I said, no policeman shall remove them from those farms.
The police were heavily involved in transporting farm invaders from farm to farm. The state was sponsoring farm invasions.
Years, now we're running. Now we're running. Now we're running.
Never mind.
Everything you see has been done. We've built this up from scratch, right up. And we're not getting 1 penny for it. Nothing. Nothing.
Whoever gets disappointed is not our... we will not share the blame for that.
Because of the hard-hearted nature of the Rhodesians, who had remained racist, remained ununderstanding, without accepting the hand of friendship that we had extended to them.
And the truth must also be told that there's a lot of black people right now who are being dispossessed by these so-called chefs. So it's also important to realize that it's not only the white commercial farmers that have suffered. There's a lot of black people that have lost their property at the hands of ZANU-PF.
The majority of those who own land now are black, but they are not just your ordinary black people. They are supporters of Mugabe's ZANU-PF party. The majority of them are politicians. Some of them are civil servants. A few are businessmen and businesswomen who support ZANU-PF. People who are not members of ZANU-PF have not been resettled.
War veterans bullied independent judges into resigning. The president appointed ZANU-aligned judges to replace them. Laws were passed to stifle opposition and silence the media.
I think between Smith and Mugabe there's a continuity, because you have a state apparatus which was inherited by Mugabe, and things were maintained. The state of emergency, for one, was maintained, and many of the laws around the media, the repressive use of state machinery. And Mugabe has maintained that, and he has in many ways actually developed it.
Users Club, we can defeat them one and all. I know you believe, and I believe. Vote Comrade Robert Mugabe for president on 27 June 2008. All good things are possible.
ZANU-PF has run a propaganda machine, which has been very efficient, which demonizes anybody who dares to stand up and question what ZANU-PF does.
The Minister of Information unleashed venom nightly on television, Professor Jonathan Moyo.
The Zimbabwean independent newspapers remained the only mass media allowing any freedom of speech. Mugabe meant to teach them a crushing lesson.
On one occasion, he said, the Daily News has gone too far. Something will have to be done about it. This was on TV on a Friday night. On Sunday night, the printing press of the Daily News was destroyed in a not so mysterious bomb explosion.
Incredibly, the Daily News found another press and came out next day featuring details of its own bombing. Mugabe then brought in new laws and finally closed the paper down. But the people of Zimbabwe continued to believe in democracy. In the towns, they had high hopes of change in the upcoming presidential election.
I want a parliament which has got a vibrant opposition. If it's MDC, that forms the government. So ZANU is the opposition. I want it to be vibrant.
Doesn't matter what Blair does. He and his running dogs, the MDC do.
Zimbabwe will never be a colony again. Zimbabwe will never be.
I often wonder why President Mugabe's party does not seem to have faith in its own ability to win an election that is free and fair. If I ever have an opportunity to talk to President Mugabe, I'll put this question to him. Why he does not seem to have faith that he can win an election that is devoid of violence, in which his rivals can reach the people through the media freely. Why he assumes that if that happens, then he will lose.
The run-up to the election was terrifying. In the rural areas, ZANU-PF recruited unemployed youth to intimidate and brutalize the local population into voting for them.
Vakanga vangori nechinangwa chekuti ndisava ndinoenderera mberi nebato reMDC. Saka vakaedza pavaigona napo kuuya vachindivhundutsira vachiti kana ukaramba uchiita zvauri kuita izvozvo togona kuuraya. Saka vakatanga kundirova vachinditocha. Tiri mugomo ndo pavaindipisa vanga vakavesa moto wavo wavaidziya. Saka pamoto apo vaiva nesimbi dzavaiti waya yavaiti vakaisa moto inotsvuka. Asi vasati vandipisa vaiti vaindirepa vachiita zvokuchinjana vari vatatu vachiti kana wovhunza kuti iwe wanyara here iye woti aiwa handina zvonzi akasira mhani kasira iwe hausi kuona kuti uri kunonoka here. Pavakazopedzisira ndichanyanya kunzwisisa zvandoita vakandibvunza kuti uchiri kuda MDC here.
There has been an attempt to equate the violence as clashes between two political parties. Far from it. The violence that we have experienced in this country is state terrorism against its own citizens.
I am convinced, I might be totally wrong, that if a stand had been taken when Mugabe unleashed the 5th Brigade in Matabeleland, if the rest of the world, if Zimbabweans had said we are not going to have any of that, and anybody that is guilty of those activities should be brought to book, I doubt very much whether we would be talking of 29 people dead during this run-up to the elections.
We are totally defenseless. We know there is nothing you can do to protect ourselves. That's why we are here. We are displaced.
Terrified opposition voters fled the rural areas, while in the urban areas every effort was made to hinder voting.
Nothing is happening. We are not voting. They are trying to frustrate us. Yes.
Since 5 o'clock.
They say I've been here starting from 7:15, and they say they are going to open. They haven't opened yet. I don't know what's the problem.
They said 7 o'clock. Yes, since 4 o'clock they haven't opened. What are they doing? People are now hungry.
They want to make sure that we don't vote within 2 days.
Now you look at the queue.
See, there is riot policy, which is beating up people. And people are scared of being beaten.
Well, I think the terror campaign has been the most prominent part of Mugabe's leadership. Armed gangs of people who can masquerade there as either members of the youth service or even members of the army. The terror tactics have come through the sense of impunity. You do anything and no one is responsible.
In desperation, many resorted to prayer, beseeching God to save Zimbabwe. Officially, Mugabe won the election. Farm invasions increased, the economy slumped. Fuel ran out. Mugabe simply printed more money.
Greatness emerges in a struggle. Emanates from the sense of commitment, the sense of sacrifice, and the sense of guided revolutionary spirit.
Mugabe punished the urban population for voting MDC with Operation Murambachina, meaning clean up filth.
Operation Clean Filth. That's another thing that is definitely the West has seen that and wondered why.
No,
why you did that.
Blowing things out of proportion.
Now, how many people were moved out of their homes, in your estimation?
Well, the numbers that Britain gave were exaggerated.
We've heard 700,000 to 800,000.
No, of course not. That's absolute nonsense. I don't think the number was more than I don't think it was more than 100,000 really.
In fact, over 700,000 people were directly affected and 2.5 million were displaced.
Murambachina. It was not even necessary to have that Murambachina. Of course, the government did explain on the fact that they wanted to clean up illegal structures. The reason for the Murambachina is purely a punishment of the urbanites for rejecting ZANU-PF during the election.
I was the Hitler of the time. I'm still the Hitler of the time.
Production ceased, inflation hit global records, money was worthless and counted in gazillions. And still, Mugabe printed more money. With the economy in meltdown, urban services collapsed. A killer epidemic of cholera followed. But the president continued to celebrate in style. Once a net exporter of maize, the country that defied imperialists now relied on handouts from them. Food was given to those who voted ZANU-PF. For the rest, there was the black market. Protest was extremely dangerous, but the opposition persisted.
Defenseless people. Okay, all right.
We don't recognize this illegitimate regime of Robert Mugabe. We're going to continue to defy them. We don't recognize POSA. We don't recognize Robert Mugabe. They're criminals.
The struggle for our independence was so genuine, and it should be respected by every Zimbabwean. But to go and kill a person, to torture people, to arrest people unnecessarily, under the guise of the struggle, no, I don't think any person would ever accept that.
The run-up to the 2008 election was a deadly battle.
The politicians fear Mugabe, while the people fear the politicians. I think in a way, Mugabe fears the people.
And the people were outraged at the dire state of the country.
I want to thank the members of the MDC, the people of Zimbabwe, for showing such resilience against the brutalization, the traumatization, and the suffering that we have experienced.
Parliamentary results were quick. The MDC won by 110 seats to 99. But presidential results were inexplicably delayed.
These are the results. These are the results. I'm calling on President Mugabe to begin a dialogue with me to begin the process of peaceful and orderly democratic transition of government.
The results were held back for over a month. Zimbabweans waited, desperate for change in leadership. Finally, it was announced. Tsvangirai had won, 48% to Mugabe's 43%. But Mugabe referred to a provision in the rewritten electoral laws.
It was concluded that there was no winner. And that in accordance with our law, we should have the two parties with the highest votes going for a runoff.
The stillness of the countryside was pierced by the misery of people brutally punished for their failure to support ZANU-PF.
kana ini ndakakaisa bhairo pano apa ndinochikanda pasi ndoti vakomana kwatakabva.
As killing and violence escalated, Tsvangirai withdrew from the contest to protect his people. He described the runoff election for president as a violent sham. Mugabe won this one-person contest, and to the outrage of almost everyone but the military, he was sworn in for an extra term by default.
uyezve ndine chisvo chokuti vana vangu ndizovaudzawo kushinga ikoko vaite asi pavanenge vazive kuti hapana chinhu chakanaka chinouya nyore asi chinouya kana uchinge watambudzika.
This flawed election caused regional leaders to intervene. They asked Thabo Mbeki to oversee a power-sharing agreement with the MDC, a government of national unity. But breaking the agreement, Mugabe gave up none of his power over the military, the election machinery, or the legal system. The violent youth militias remained on the payroll.
From outside the Rainbow Towers in Harare, all appears calm and peaceful. But inside, a bitter fight for power is definitely raging on.
The opposition will want to be the ruling party. And it will devise ways and means of getting there, including violence. I'm not just referring to you. I'm referring to the system as we have seen it in Africa. That's how it is.
What do you do to a hero or to a father who's gone wayward? What do you do? Can you discipline your hero? Can you discipline your father?
You can recall the number of awards and accolades that Mugabe received in the first decade and a half of independence. From the National Reconciliation Speech of March 4, let's turn our swords into plowshares. Let's be one united nation. You are my brother, I am your brother.
If yesterday you hated me, today you cannot avoid the love that binds you to me and me to you. Is it not folly, therefore, that in these circumstances, anybody should seek to revive the wounds and grievances of the past?
That man, compared to Mugabe of June 27, 2008, are worlds apart.
Mugabe's obsession is just with power. His preoccupation is just consolidating his grip on power. There are a lot of people who are saying Mugabe has changed, particularly since 2000. Mugabe has never changed. He's remarkably consistent. I've never seen a more remarkably consistent person than Robert Mugabe. What changed was the circumstance of power. His grip on power was under threat. He was getting unpopular. So he had actually to take the gloves off.
I don't think it is of consequence to a man who is starving. I don't think it is of consequence whether their leader changed or whether he has been consistent. I don't think it is of any consequence to a man who is displaced after casting his ballot, displaced from his home in an orgy of violence. I don't think it is of consequence to the man whose hand is chopped off because he has voted the way he wishes.
I think how Mugabe is seen in the African diaspora, and very powerful diasporas like the African American diaspora, who see Mugabe as a great liberator and will not brook any suggestion that Mugabe is a cruel dictator that he is, because they see him through the prism of Western domination that they have experienced, and they will not see the cost upon the Zimbabwean people of this kind of posturing.
Mugabe is a well-educated man. Unfortunately, psychologically, he's not been able to look forward and get out of this mold of thinking of the past and not the future.